Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Shewchuk here, and I'm continuing on with my interviews that I've started. And I'm very pleased to be able to sit down this evening with Ernie Piche. He resides on the Clearwater River Dene Nation, and he played with Peter and Frank Piche for many, many years as a drummer. He also plays the guitar and he sings. And he told me today that he was 69 years old. And I'm really honored and thankful for you to be able to sit down with me and share some of your stories and some of your history that you have. So, Timarsicho. Thank you, Ernie. So, my first question would be if you could share with us maybe how old you were and how you got started in music.
Well, first of all, I started out as a boy choir in Beauville Residential School. I believe I was about 13 or something, 14. And we made a couple of records while we were there. And from there, I sort of got hooked on music.
So,
and
go ahead, sorry.
When I got back home after that, then I watched Jack Sylvester was playing.
My dad.
Yeah, your dad. So, and I watch him often. Then once in a while, I'd get a pail or something, while he was playing guitar, I would play on that pail as a drum. So that's how I learned how to be a drummer and to play guitar.
Wow, you started on a pail playing for my dad. I didn't know that. Wow, that's such a good story to hear, because that's something I wasn't aware of. But before we continue on, I wanted to show everybody this here, because you pulled that out when I come and interview you. And this is an album that you recorded at it says the Indian Residential School in Beauville. And if I could just point this out, Ernie's this guy right over here, and he also pointed out Bert LeMake was also in this choir with him back in the day, and this was an album that they recorded at the residential school out in Beauville, and they did a lot of songs, and that's pretty awesome history there that for you to be able to share that with us, Timarsicho. But as you were saying, so you got into your residential school and you learned how to sing through the choir, and you played the pail with my dad and got into it. So that's what started you. So how did you start playing with Peter and Frank Piche?
First time they bought some equipment, instruments.
What year do you think that would be around?
Oh, that was when we moved into the reserve here. I forgot the year though.
Would that be 60s, 70s?
70s, something.
70s, early 70s?
Yeah. And so we bought some drums and he asked me to play for it. So from then on, I didn't know how before, but I remember how to, when I was playing with your dad, just by listening to the music, what to do. So from there on,
so you learned everything by ear and by watching.
That's the common thing. You gotta listen by ear. Even when you play for somebody, rhythm. That's how I learned.
So maybe you could share some of the stories of playing with Peter and Frank Piche, and maybe some of the places you traveled. Maybe you can mention maybe some of other musicians that you might have met along the way.
Well, first time we went out was to Fond du Lac. They had a grand opening at that time.
Grand opening for
a hall, I think.
A community hall.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we went there. They were asked to play there. So there was about 4 of us at that time. There was me, Peter, Frank, and Frank Jr. Yeah. So that's how we started our band. From then on, we went to Meadow Lake to play, and we got some plays there. Right here till we played when air roundups and all that.
Right here on the reserve. You guys played here many, many times because I remember.
Even the treaty days, I know. And I believe there's Chart, Alberta, and I believe one time I went to Anzac or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did Elmer Cisco start playing with your band? And because I remember
once in a while, you know.
he was just there once in a while playing with you guys.
Uh-huh.
He was pretty talented too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Is there any other musicians that you could remember from back in those days that might have stood out to you that
Well, before
I know you mentioned my dad, but go ahead.
we had a band when we had that Animal Hall.
Really?
Yeah. We had there was Adrian Herman,
Daddy? Okay.
me, and I believe it was Buckley, the late Buckley, and there's another guy. That's how we started out.
Wow.
And then later on, then George Congy, he was with us too.
Who was the singer in that band?
I forgot who it was. And then later on, Leonard Tulishur, and you know.
So, okay.
Yeah, I was with him too also too.
Back
And
in
he
those
was
early
singing,
days, that was before North Wind.
Yeah, before Northwind.
Before North Wind. So,
Yeah.
what year do you think that was? In the 70s or late 70s maybe? Or
Maybe 70, 80, something like that, yeah.
some of those early years? Wow.
So I've been around with some of the bands. And then the time they had that that shooting, remember that time there was
Yeah.
those musicians were here for a while. I played with those guys. Rhythm, you know.
Wow.
I like it a lot. I like playing music, you know. It helps me. Sometimes I get stressed out, so I turn to music.
Music is a good way to release whatever you're feeling.
Uh-huh.
You
If
could be
you're feeling
happy
down,
or feeling down.
or I just watch TV or something, you know.
But music is something that you've had all your
Yeah.
life. Maybe you could talk about your late son and your current son and how you they play too, right? And they once
Yeah.
had a band called the Red Suns, I think, was it? Or,
I believe so.
yeah, maybe you can maybe mention them or something if you'd like.
First time when I was playing with those people, or Lago used to come along and it was little, eh? Just always hang around there, you know, dancing, listening to the people. That's how he started, you know, picking up music. And by watching me, he learned how to play guitar and drums, Palmer. And then they formed a band, the Red Suns or something, with Jake.
Hmm. So like the music stays in the family.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You passed it on, and hopefully they pass it on. And
I hope so. And now that's my little ones here. They like to dance and sing too, eh?
so maybe they will be future
You
musicians.
never know. I hope so too. I was trying to teach my granddaughter how to play guitar once in a while. He had an electric guitar there, so
That's pretty cool. So going back to those early days of playing, you mentioned that you were playing at the Animal Hall before Northwind, and some of those names you mentioned there were some of the names that were never mentioned before. So maybe you could talk about those early days. How did you guys get your instruments, and how did you guys get started way back then when you were younger?
well, we had our own. We bought our own instruments. You know, they weren't. You know, with that time they didn't have any drums, so it's only rhythm and bass and the lead guitar.
Hmm.
So I remember one time Daddy, he was playing, you know. So we had a guitar. I guess it was somehow it started smoking. Right? So
The guitar was smoking.
yeah. I had to laugh out of that too.
So it was too hot playing. His guitar started smoking.
I guess so.
That was an electric
The one
guitar.
also
Or
was smoking.
was that it?
Yeah, it was smoking. Right.
That was on stage.
I played away right away.
Oh, good memories, though. That's the thing. Music is such a fun thing, and good memories.
Yeah.
So when you were playing with Peter and Frank, you were playing with the fiddle, right? Doing the old time stuff. Was that different or harder for you to learn, or how did you?
No, it's just how he plays. That's how I pick up it. Before I didn't do. I didn't have any knowledge about drums.
What are some other musicians that you might have looked up to when you were younger? Was there anybody that you might have looked up to that you saw playing that maybe inspired you, or a drummer maybe that you saw playing that you liked, or somebody from...
Not really. The first one was whenever I hear Johnny Cash, Ring of Fire.
Those kind of music is
Yeah.
what inspired you. I see. Okay, right on.
Yeah. Even when you're in the bush, they had those radios, eh?
Yeah.
You could hook it on snares or something. You listen to the music, eh? So I heard that Ring of Fire a lot of time, eh? So it's sort of I like music, so
So it caught your attention, caught your ear,
yeah.
and really got you into it. But that's pretty cool, because see, even for me, when I was learning how to play, I never really got the chance to play with a fiddle band, like the old time style. And I really respect that, And I was very grateful many, many years ago. I think it was probably in the late 80s when you guys were playing on the reserve, when I called up the late Frank Piche and asked him if I could come over and jam during his breaks.
Yeah.
And he said yes, he didn't say no at all. He just said, bring your guitars and come on out, I didn't know him very well back then. I just called him and asked him, and he was able to let me go up on a stage and jam. And I think you even drummed for us that time. You might remember that, eh? Back in the late 80s, we were able to jam together, at least I could say that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to remember that with you. So is there anything else that you'd like to add that maybe you forgot, or something you'd like to mention? Because, I am documenting all these musicians, and I usually ask them if there's anything that they'd want to share, or anything that they could remember that they think that stands out that you might want to say. Is there anything at all?
I know there's a lot of musicians in town, because whenever we go firefighting to the old days, you bring guitars, and we each take our turn singing. After in the evenings, we get together, so it was kind of nice like that,
Can you mention maybe some of those local musicians that you remember playing with, even if they're here today, or they were gone, or they might have passed?
And some of them are gone.
Can you mention some of those names for us?
Norman Margaret,
Norman Latour.
you, and George Kung was there, and Plastic Bag Gerald,
Oh, yeah.
that one. There's quite a few, but I forget some of them though.
But that's good to know. So you enjoyed firefighting and playing guitar in the evenings and sharing music with others.
Because there's a lot of people gathered around to listen to us singing.
That's awesome.
After a hard day's work, so we entertain them like that.
That's really, really awesome.
Yeah, it's good. You share your music with people.
So you being part of the Peter and Frank's band, was there a name for that band, or what was it called, the Big C Band? Like, what was the name of your band? There was, I'm just wondering, because I just call it Peter and Frank Piche is all I remember.
Yeah,
Eh?
that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was?
Yeah.
There was no real band name?
No.
I see. Could
Must
be.
be a big C band or something.
So do you have
Okay.
any memories that you could remember about playing with Peter and Frank Piche that stands out to you that you might remember, or a funny story or any kind of story that you'd like to share with us?
No, not really too many stories of, but I enjoyed playing with them. You know, people think that when you play for fiddling, there's sort of a rhythm you got to add to your drums. You know, it's not like rock and all that. Eh? So once I got used to it, then especially when Frank Jr. is playing with us on bass, so bass and drums they go together. So they blend into the music. Eh? It makes it good.
So you enjoyed playing with them and
Yeah.
with Frank Jr. on the
Uh-huh.
bass. So that if you
Because
had a
now-
good bass player,
Yeah.
it made you a better drummer, I guess, right?
Uh-huh. But if somebody else steps in, then off beat or something, then
Makes
You
it
know.
difficult, eh?
Yeah.
Yes, I know what you mean.
uh,
But that's nice for you to share that. So before we sign off, Ernie, and before we sign off with this interview, I'd like to ask you something here. See, with all these musicians that I interview, I usually try to ask them if they could give a message or some words of wisdom to anybody that's young out there, or anybody. You don't have to be young. Maybe somebody out there that might want to pick up an instrument and learn, or maybe somebody that's currently playing and maybe wants to pursue music, or maybe start a band. What kind of words or wisdom of advice would you give them?
well, first of all, I'd say you play music, do it from the heart, and enjoy your music, and learn from the ear, your eyes, and your touch of your hands, and the best advice is just enjoy music. It'll help you in the long run. If you're down, turn to music. It'll make your spirits go up again. That's all I have to say.
Ernie, thank you very much for sitting down and sharing some of your history and your past with us. You know, for the future generations, it's very awesome for you to be able to share what you shared with us today. Ti Marcy Cho.
Mercy.